things historically have been happening and where the trend line is going. So in terms of total bike rider fatalities over this 20-year period, we can certainly see, peaks and troughs, but more or less we are very much average around the 40 cyclists killed on the road network per year. So it hasn't really changed a significant amount over the last 2 decades. It's very much plateaued around that 40 mark. If we compare that to the way that we have seen vehicle fatalities, the trauma that's occurring there has been reducing over the years. So the second graph there is actually fatalities per capita. So it's taking into account not just the number of deaths that are occurring, but how that relates to the actual population or per head. So vehicle fatalities is that blue line there. And we can see that, there is a downward gradient there. Cyclist fatalities also has a downward gradient, but it's not quite as, steep. And that is just indicative that we are seeing quite wonderful improvements in our road safety performance when it relates to general traffic or vehicles. Our cycling population is not seeing that same level of, benefit. So there still seems to be an issue with cyclists being killed on the road network, and it doesn't seem to be decreasing at the same rate as we are seeing with general traffic. Now, when we look at the actual gender split for that, unsurprisingly, it is men being the bulk of those that are killed on the network. I'd say unsurprisingly in that men are generally more commonly riding, and also more commonly riding in those higher risk environments, which could be higher speed roads or busy interchanges and things like that. So that's just a little takeaway there as well. Today's module topic will be all about roundabouts. Now, we could have included roundabouts within the intersection module because roundabouts is an intersection configuration, but it's deliberately been separated here because they are generally quite a significant pain point for cyclists. And it's another one of those areas where traditionally we've done very poor work in designing for safe cycling facilities within roundabouts or adjacent roundabouts. So there's definitely a strong case for roundabouts' ability to improve the safety for general traffic. So for those in vehicles, roundabouts are a wonderful thing. They have excellent safety features. So it's the way that you've configured the roundabout with the angles. If you were to crash within the roundabout, they tend to be more of that angle where you've got an ability to kind of glance or collide with each other in like that glancing function, meaning it's not perpendicular or T-bone type of crash. So that's for general traffic. However, those same benefits are not echoed for vulnerable road users, pedestrians, and cyclists. In fact, cyclists and pedestrians tend to fare worse at roundabouts compared to a signalized intersection. So just something to keep in mind there. That's why we focus so much on it in today's module. Now, there is no Wally in today's module, so don't be on the lookout for him because he's not going to be making an occurrence. We've already started the recording there, so I just wanted to briefly mention the previous 360-degree video where you would have seen 2 examples of a signalized intersection, Melbourne's protected intersection, and then completing a hook turn. Love to hear your feedback in the chat about how you experienced both of those and if you had a preferred arrangement. Today's content will follow a very similar structure to our intersection module. So we'll discuss a lot about what protected roundabouts are. We'll talk about their design, features, look at some international examples, and then jump into Melbourne's protected roundabout. Then we'll move on to multi-lane roundabouts and I suppose really discuss the significant risks associated with those designs for cyclists and talk about what can be used instead to help support cycling movements within those facilities. Finally, we'll finish on local roundabouts and have a chat of, what can be appropriate for cyclists within those spaces. There is a VicRoads document that was produced 7 years ago now, guidance on bicycle and pedestrian treatments at roundabouts, which is a really wonderful resource, and we do reference that quite a bit. Similarly, there's an Austroads report, which is bicycle safety at roundabouts. Now, I think I mentioned this in a previous module, but I think it really speaks volumes when you've got a research authority or organization like Austroads, who's actually commissioned a report into the safety of cyclists at roundabouts. So they're basically saying, like, this is a really big issue. I'm going to investigate this and publish a report to, really address what is currently shown as guidance and what we should be doing instead. I think that speaks quite volumes of the level of risk of cyclists at roundabouts. So a protected roundabout, this is an artistic rendition of Melbourne's protected roundabout. Looks something like this. There are a few different configurations, which we'll go through with our international examples, but the main thing that you want to be achieving within protected roundabouts is a cyclist will have an ability to use kind of an off-road or protected feature away from the circulating area. So this inside ring is where general traffic obviously travel. Cyclists are not being encouraged to use that. Instead, they are being directed to use an off-road or a protected facility that runs adjacent to that inner ring. Now, it leads in very well to our next slide here, where we have got 3 cyclists here. We've got cyclist A, cyclist B, cyclist C, all of them within a roundabout here. And we're going to launch a poll now, which will ask, which cyclist do you believe is most at risk? So you've got cyclist A, B, or C. I'll give you 30 seconds to have a go at answering that poll. And yeah, if your poll hasn't launched, you can just add that in the chat. That's fine. You're not getting marked on this poll. So
while we're waiting on that, Max, just an observation on the stats you spoke to earlier with cycling crashes on the network. Do we have any stats on the serious injuries?
Good question. So I took that from the Cycling, Walking Australia and New Zealand participation rates survey. That is publicly available, so you're welcome to give that a Google. I cannot remember if they include serious injury stats in that as well, but there would be national databases where you could look up that information and do your own crash analysis. Yeah. But I'll check that report first. I can't remember from the top of my head.
Great. Thank you, Max.
All right. I think we might just close the poll there and we can share the results. And from what I can see on my screen, it looks to be, yeah, we can see a bit of diversity in those answers there. And I agree with all of those responses, and I agree with the comment in the chat that there is no all of the above, because that's probably what I would be selecting as well. So let's give a prize out there to Tim. But cyclist A, riding in the roundabout, they're on the periphery, or like on the outside of the roundabout, where it's just a really uncomfortable position to be as a cyclist. Cyclist A, why they could be particularly at risk is this yellow vehicle could see the purple vehicle kind of entering that roundabout and then just assume that they've got the right of way to enter. So they could just be focused exclusively. They're looking right for oncoming traffic. If they see the vehicle adjacent to them going, then they may just go as well, which is where cyclist A could be at significant risk. Cyclist B is in a really precarious scenario here. So the lines that we're seeing there are the driver's sight lines, or where they're focused on. And you can see the red car as well as that purple car. Cyclist B is just not within that zone of priority for the motorist. So the motorist is really looking out for the big metal cage with the engine. Like, that's just how we've trained to look for things. There's lots of psychology that supports that we are just trained to look for cars. We're not really looking for cyclists or even motorcyclists for that reason. And being in that position there as cyclist B, you're definitely in quite a grave scenario there, because it looks like that because the purple vehicle has already started to enter the roundabout, there is going to perhaps be a collision there. Cyclist C, so there's a few reasons why this area is of concern. A cyclist C, when they were back at this point here, the exiting vehicle would have resulted in a collision there. But similarly, the purple vehicle is able to see C, but the yellow vehicle cannot see C because of that. The term that I used on Wednesday, the dynamic visual obstruction, or the masking. Basically, that purple vehicle blocks the sight lines for the yellow vehicle. So the purple vehicle may, at the last minute, just slam on the brakes and stop and let the cyclist pass, but the yellow vehicle may not and enter that roundabout, and that results in another collision there. So I do think that the answer is all of those results in quite a significant risk for cyclists, and ties in nicely with our next slide here, which is where are we seeing trauma occurring for cyclists at roundabouts? So this was done a few years ago now, nearly 10 years ago, but Austroads commissioned this kind of study into all the different crashes that have occurred within roundabouts, reviewed the police reports to determine exactly what were the movements of both the cyclists and the vehicle. And overwhelmingly, at 68%, is a vehicle that is entering the roundabout versus a cyclist that is already in the roundabout. So the green dotted line there is the cyclist, and the red solid line is the vehicle. And this is the classic example of looking but failing to see, or looking just for those cars, seeing that there's a gap in the cars and not noticing it all, or not processing that there could be a cyclist there as well. So 68% of crashes are that type of crash type, with a vehicle failing to give way and entering that roundabout where there's already a cyclist there. About 8% is where cyclists are crossing adjacent the circulating area, and they may be crossing as a pedestrian. So there could be like a curb ramp or median refuge or something along there where a cyclist may be crossing. These types of crashes tend to occur because as motorists are exiting the roundabout, they're putting their foot on the accelerator and they're picking up speed. So they're no longer cognitively looking out, thinking of giving way and things like that. So that's one of the reasons that, they're shifting from brake to accelerator and they're putting on speed. But also the sight lines at those scenarios. So if you were at the other quadrant here and crossing in that direction, it can be at times, depending on what is adjacent the roadside, difficult to see if that vehicle is exiting at that leg, and you could just make the wrong decision as a cyclist. So we're seeing about 8% of those crashes occurring in that fashion. This one always catches me by surprise. So this is exiting motor vehicles versus circulating cyclists, which is around 9%. As a cyclist, that's the one that I'm personally most terrified of. I get very nervous when I am doing, say, like a right turn at a roundabout and a vehicle behind me wants to go through. I get very, very nervous that they are going to continue through and not acknowledge that I'm going right, and you've got that awkward conflict. So it's interesting that the statistics don't necessarily match my, perception of safety, which I think is actually a really good thing, because we should be basing our design decisions and any of our projects on actual evidence, as opposed to your own perception of what feels safe. But certainly, as I said, as a cyclist, that's the crash type I'm most concerned about within roundabouts. And actually, in today's 360-degree module video, there is a really good example of this, collision. There's no collision that occurs, but it's that fear of a through motorist could potentially just go straight through and ignore a right turning cyclist. So really worth watching today's module video as well. Sideswipe on a roundabout, so where vehicles may stray from their traffic lane and encroach into the bicycle lane or too close to cyclists, is around that 10% as well. So we can see that there's a variety of different crash types that are occurring, but overwhelmingly, the most common is the failing to give way to cyclists already in the roundabout. Now, we will talk about protected roundabouts in today's discussion. This is not an example of a protected roundabout. Some people think that this is what protected means. This is a wonderful example of grade separation. This is the Hovenring in the Netherlands, for those that aren't familiar with this. And it's, as you can see, it's basically completely separating cyclists and pedestrians away from this busy motorway below, so they don't have to, deal with any of that traffic below. They've got their own separate facility. If you've got the ability to do this, by all means, do this, but a protected roundabout does look a little bit differently. So I just wanted to show the Hovenring because I think it's really cool. But a protected roundabout is a little bit different here. So similar to our intersections, we will talk about the design configurations. And once again, this has been adopted from a North American research authority. So different terminology, and it's also been flipped just for this training session. But as I mentioned, what we want to be doing is we want to be providing our cyclist facilities away from the circulating area. So we don't want to be recommending that cyclists use the same travel path as motorists, because we know, as we just discussed on those crash types, motorists may fail to give way to cyclists in there. Motorists may exit their leg and then conflict with a cyclist in the roundabout. Motorists may, veer from their traffic lane and then resulting in a collision with cyclists. So if we can avoid that as a situation altogether and provide off-road or protected cyclist facilities away from that circulating area, we'll see the safety benefits associated with that. Now, I'll just go to the next one because it's got all the design features, a bit easier to talk to. Number one here is the bicycle crossing point, or, where the cyclists are crossing over. So you can see there's a bicycle lane there. Number two is the yield lines. So we would call that give way line marking or something like that. Basically the locations where it is clear for motorists that they have to slow down and give way to pedestrians and cyclists crossing within that space, they are not awarded priority. Now, this is a very confusing part of this diagram, which it says bicycle stop line or yield lines. I'm just going to cross that out because you wouldn't have both the cyclist and the motorist yielding. You would pick one or the other. So generally we recommend make the motorist slow down, make them give way to our vulnerable road users, and don't worry about number 3 at all because it's just overly confusing. And I would say that is for our jurisdictions. Over in North America, that they do that, and also in Europe, they do that, where you've got the yield lines for both. I think it's very strange. Number 4 is, once again, not a significant issue, but just the curb radius, just ensuring that things aren't too tight for cyclists to turn and interrupting their journey. Number 5, I wouldn't say is a critical feature either, but it's suggesting that, you've got something that separates the pedestrian facility to the cycling facility, channelizing islands or a curb system or something like that. I think it offers some degree of delineation, but it also could present a tripping hazard for those pedestrians crossing there or errant cyclists as well. So I don't see that as a critical feature. Finally, number 6 being just the associated signage. We would be using give way signage as well. Okay, so you'd be including that give way just to make that a regulatory thing, and then using the associated, pedestrian crossing legs and things like that. Any questions so far from Marissa or Catherine before I get stuck into some examples?
None from me, Max. Lots of conversation in the chat, but no questions at the moment.
Just a few. What is the length of that section where the car has to give way? Max, is it the length of just a single vehicle, I imagine?
Ideally, yeah. You provide that setback, 6 meters or so to be able to cater for one vehicle exiting, and then they're not holding up the circulating area. But as we'll see in these examples coming up, it depends on what land constraints you have. So it's a really good question. We'll give a prize out there.
Yeah, thank you. Just an observation on, I guess, congestion through the roundabout in this type of arrangement. I mean, it's depends. It's depends what scenario we're looking at, isn't it? The road environment, peak times, outside of peak times, how drivers use the roundabout. Lots of things going on.
I would say that congestion would get worse because you've got vehicles kind of having to slow here for giving way to any pedestrians or cyclists crossing. Then they enter the roundabout where they slow and give way to any motorists there. Then as they're departing or exiting the roundabout, they need to slow and give way to any pedestrians and cyclists as well. So all of that deceleration does generally result in, slower travel times through there and more congestion. But all of those are very wonderful things for improving cyclist safety, lower traffic volumes, lower speeds, and also getting all of those vehicles onto other more appropriate routes. So if these are your networks for cyclists, then that can be at the expense of, ensuring that all vehicles always get the level of service A.
Yeah, certainly. Just another observation with the pedestrian crossing. Do you need a give way sign at the pedestrian crossing in this arrangement?
I'll show you the one that we've got in Melbourne and how exactly that's signed. Depending on which jurisdiction you're in, there's a few different ways that can be done. So I can't speak uniformly. Unfortunately, Australia does not do everything uniformly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And time for a couple more?
Sure, let's go.
Yep. Are the facilities in 4 also referred to as refuge islands as per protected intersections?
So the corner refuge islands within the protected intersections, yeah, they're obviously at the quadrants there. These, I haven't seen them being referred to as that. No, they're just kind of separators or yeah, just a curved area to provide that protected facility.
Thank you. And just one more. If the distance from the roundabout to the bike pedestrian crossing point is small, what if an existing car suddenly has to prop and cars behind following suddenly stop, blocking circulating roundabout? Wouldn't there be increased risk of rear end collisions?
Yes, that could happen. And yes, you may have an increase in rear end or sideswipe type crashes within the roundabout. But it is much better outcome to have that because they are generally, people walk away from those types of collisions. It is an annoying thing, and it means it goes to insurance companies and mechanics and things like that. But generally, those rear end sideswipe crashes are completely survivable. If we compared that to the other option of getting cyclists riding within the circulating area, because that is deemed too much of an annoyance, and a collision between a cyclist and a vehicle in the circulating area, 90% of the time that is going to be a serious injury resulting in hospitalization or fatality. So if you look at it from the severity of the different crash outcomes, I'd still be going for this as a preferred design.
Fantastic. Thanks. That's all from me, Max. Thank you.
Max, what about trucks and buses?
Yes, it is a good point. So generally, where we would be looking at these protected roundabouts, you wouldn't have multi-lane configurations, which is where your kind of heavier vehicles tend to be. You may have, I guess in local streets, you can have buses and things like that. You would just be doing all your swept park analysis to ensure that all of those movements can still be maintained by your garbage trucks and your buses if they're still using that network. But I wouldn't see it as something that you can't do on those routes. But they tend to be on higher order roads, which is where you wouldn't necessarily be doing this.
Yeah. What's the distance of the crossing from the roundabout? Is it not better for traffic to have it a couple meters back from it? And then there's another question which might be similar. Can this setting be moved further away from the roundabout to allow more vehicles to queue? Oh, it's probably...
Yeah, so it is a balance on exactly what your land constraints are. The more that you move it down, there's two kind of annoying things about that is it becomes less attractive for both pedestrians and cyclists. So they may just choose to ride in the circulating area because they don't want to do that. The other thing is the further that you bring it away, motorists exiting the roundabout will be picking up speed, and then they're less likely to then have to slow down again to give way. So you don't want to make it too far away, even though that will give you more storage area for vehicles exiting. It can create other risks as well.
That's all for now.
All right, we'll look at some examples, and I think that will help to clarify some of those statements that I've been making. So this first example is where we do actually have quite a reasonable land availability. This is in Assen, which is in the Netherlands, and I have flipped this image as well. So a vehicle within this space, say they were turning right, traveling from here, that's their kind of movement. A cyclist that wanted to turn right, they've got a couple options actually. They can go from the same direction like this. It's also actually a bi-directional facility, so they could also just go like this. All I really wanted to show on this was there's no interaction there with the cyclists in the circulating area. They've got their own path, completely separated, and they don't have to really conflict within that circulating area at all. Where cyclists are crossing, they're at distinct locations. So the cyclists are crossing the legs where I'm circling. At all of those locations, they have the right of way. So vehicles are slowing down and yielding to them. So they get the priority. And as you can see, this is quite a large footprint. So in this example, it looks like there's about 2 cars lengths between the edge of the circulating area to where the crossing point is. So that'd be 12, 15 meters or something like that, which is a fairly large footprint. The benefit of this is you've got a nice connected network around that circulating area, and you don't need to worry about cyclists mingling in the middle. The disbenefit is it's relatively circuitous. It takes a while to get around there to the right. And also, as vehicles are exiting, as I mentioned before, they're kind of picking up speed. So by the time they get to that conflict point, it can be a little bit of an annoyance to have to then start braking again to give way. And that annoyance can then lead to, perhaps taking risky maneuvers and not giving way. Now, ideally, what you could provide to help mitigate that as a risk is if you had all of these crossing points raised. So if they were all raised features, then you've significantly reduced the risk of vehicles speeding through there and failing to give way, because if there's a raised table or a wombat crossing, they're much more likely to slow down because there's an actual, steep grade in front of them and they don't want to feel uncomfortable. There's a speed hump. So they're much more likely to slow down. So best practice would certainly be to raise each of those conflict points as well. I'll show you what it looks like out on the ground so you can get a better appreciation here. So this is how things look. Now, as I said before, the exact give way signage and, all the line marking and things, they do look different to our jurisdictions. We're just looking at this from a principle level. I'll also just go back to one slide, and something else that I just wanted to quickly mention, which is if you were a cyclist crossing over this leg here and a vehicle was coming the other way and exiting, once again, what I was talking about in the previous module, that conflict point is very, very close to perpendicular, meaning cyclists are crossing in front of that vehicle exiting, which is a very big tick. In the circulating area, if cyclists were riding here, that conflict angle is incredibly acute, which is really why you're providing these protected facilities, is to open up the sight lines, make it as clear as possible where the conflict points are, and ensure that motorists are able to see cyclists crossing there. This next example is one where we have a much smaller footprint. So you can see the circulating area here for motorists. Directly adjacent that on the periphery is a nice circular bicycle lane. That's kind of just 2 concentric circles being used there. This one is in Rotterdam, by the way. It's still in the Netherlands. Now, this has been, designed to be able to work within the existing footprint. You can see the edge of the buildings there is very close to the roadway. So obviously land is quite tight in this scenario. The benefit associated with this is for cyclists that are traveling, they've got less of a distance to ride. If they wanted to go left or through or right, there's less of that, having to go down 12 meters and then back to the right 12 meters to go just straight or anything like that. It is a much more reduced kind of connection there. The disbenefit with this is that conflict angle that I was talking about before. So very conveniently in this snap that I happen to have, you can see that this wide vehicle is exiting, and you can see a cyclist riding there as well. If that cyclist was perhaps a bit close or riding at speed or things like that, you can appreciate that exiting motorist would have a very hard time of seeing that cyclist. And we really want to make those conflict points as obvious as possible. I'll show how that looks from the ground, which once again, I have another wonderful cyclist here who's providing this demonstration. And I might bring in a little Porsche driver here just to help with my figure. Nothing against Porsche drivers. But if you put yourself in the perspective of that vehicle and you were trying to exit this leg, your ability to be able to see this cyclist as they're coming around and potentially crossing over you, it's quite limited. Similarly, if you were the cyclist, you may not necessarily have good sight lines of what is their turning movement going to be. So you may not see where their blinker is on or anything like that, which can create that confusion. Now, I'm not saying that you always have to have the big footprint to do protected roundabouts, and this is terrible. I'm just saying that it is a bit of a spectrum with protected roundabouts. The closer you bring the bicycle crossing facility to the circulating area, the more that this sightline risk becomes apparent. So just something to be mindful of. Another international example, this one is in Cambridge in the United Kingdom on Fendon Road, for anyone interested. It opened in July 2020. And it's kind of an amalgamation between the first example we looked at and the second one, where we've got a little bit more space to play with. And this is, I guess, what you would call the yardstick, or what you'd be aiming for within designs. And it's basically enough room for an exiting vehicle to be able to prop, yield, and give way without blocking the circulating area. The sight lines for this one are improved compared to the last one. Not as good as that perfectly perpendicular one that we saw in the first example, but they are improved there. The other thing that is quite good is, once again, having just this one smooth curve radius for cyclists. Cyclists tend to prefer that, as opposed to having parts that kind of connect at weird angles. Just more comfortable to ride with one nice smooth radius there. So hopefully that gives you a bit of appreciation of the different ways that these protected roundabouts can look. And we have a look at this one on the ground here. Kind of illustrates the point that I've been talking about, where you can see that motorist has quite excellent sight lines of the cyclists that are crossing in front of them. In the other scenario, the cyclist would have been right up against them, which is a bit more of a precarious situation. I'm going to just play a video now of a real protected roundabout that has been installed that will just show you the operation of things. And whilst this is playing, I will check in with my colleagues to see if there's any questions.
Nothing from me, Max.
Hello. There was a very good observation from an earlier example that you had, Max, where there was zebra markings on all legs apart from one leg of the roundabout.
Really?
Do you know why that may be?
I
Because
can't
I'm
say I even
intrigued.
noticed that.
I know, it was a fantastic observation. Yeah, so
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a great point. Let's give a prize out there for that wonderful vision. I'll go back to
Yeah.
that video, I swear. This leg does not have the zebra crossing.
Yes. My assumption was maybe it's because it's I don't know, the authority doesn't want pedestrians to cross at that location, or for it to be a priority for pedestrians for some reason. I'm not sure. But yeah, if the person that did notice it is anonymous, so please send us a private message so you can get your your prize.
How peculiar. I can't believe I've never noticed that as well. That's excellent. Well done.
Yeah,
I'll go back
I
to that
know.
video now. We can keep watching that.
And just a question about the examples you've been showing.
Yep.
Is it a problem with the example shown that vehicles stopped to wait for pedestrians to cross are blocking the cycleway?
So the way in practice this tends to work, and perhaps this video will show it well, is that actually you might see it. Oh, let's see if I can draw it quickly. No, but see the pedestrian crossing. See that motorist was waiting there even while the pedestrians are crossing. So they tend to wait adjacent the cyclist path and just treat that all as I need to give space, a gap in both cyclists and pedestrians.
Yeah.
So just the way in practice these things tend to work is it would occur that a motorist would block the cycle lane, but it's not a frequent occurrence, I wouldn't suggest.
It's a fantastic vision, isn't it? Seeing it in action.
Yeah, and this one is actually peculiar because the bottom leg is raised. You can tell by those piano key line marking, that's a raised crossing point, but the other ones don't look to be. So I'm not sure behind the reasoning behind that either.
Yeah, oh, that's a good pickup.
But you can see lots of pedestrians, lots of cyclists riding through here, and general traffic just, doing their thing as well. And it is a cycling corridor, and that's why this is being kind of prioritized. And I think this hopefully gives you a bit of confidence that these things, they can work. They look a little bit unusual, or we may not be used to seeing this, but generally, you can implement these things, and both modes of transport can coexist.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Max.
No problem. All right, I'll talk about Melbourne's protected roundabout now. Within the 360-degree video that you'll watch as part of this module, we actually talk about the history of this project. So I'm not going to get into the detail of that now. I'm just going to focus on the design aspects. But this example here is an aerial image of how things used to look. You can see that there is bicycle lanes on the periphery of the roundabout. As I mentioned before, riding on the periphery is incredibly stressful. Much like I said before, if you're riding in the periphery and you're turning right and a motorist is behind you and wants to go through, you've just got this really awkward point in time where you just hope as a cyclist that they acknowledge that you're turning right. You should be signaling for that, but you hope that they've picked up on that cue. Anyway, so that was the arrangement prior. You just had these on-road bicycle lanes within the circulating area, and quite an uncomfortable experience for cyclists. This is how things look afterwards, after the intervention. So this is the protected roundabout design. All the legs of this roundabout, I'll just go to the next slide. We've got a full size image of it. All the legs of this roundabout are raised, as I mentioned. So that's a really positive thing to be doing, because it's basically enforcing that lower speed. It's not just relying on the sign that says give way. It's actually putting in a physical measure to slow down vehicles, so they're much more likely to yield for both pedestrians and cyclists there. You might have noticed that this shape looks a little bit different to the other ones. It's not one nice smooth circle. So there has been some complaints around the way that this functions and those kind of 45-degree bends to make up the octagon, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep. Some cyclists think that's really annoying. Personally, I don't think it's the end of the world to have that type of arrangement. It's it might look like it's quite a severe turn, but as long as you're not going like 30 kilometers per hour, you'll be able to make it. So it's not terrible. But welcome anyone else's perspective on that. If you have ridden through these protected roundabouts, if you have any experiences you'd like to share, feel free to put it in the chat. I did want to ask a question to the chat, which is, what are the disadvantages of this type of roundabout for cyclists? So I've spoken a lot about the positives. The cyclists that are riding within this, you know, you're away from the circulating area. You don't have to worry about commingling in the center there with motorists. Anyone in the chat want to take a guess at what are the disadvantages associated with this type of configuration for cyclists? So from the cyclist perspective, I'll give you 30 seconds to pop down an answer.
Max,
Yes.
we have, just while people are popping down their answers there, sorry, with all the responses, I've lost the question. Oh, how does it work with the left and right hand side cyclist lane ending suddenly?
Poorly. I think it's strange. So I think that's referencing these points here, where it's just like the cycling facility ends and it's going straight into that angled parking that we were talking about as well. Ideally, you'd have these networks that are completely connected. Even on, you know, this side, you can see is adjacent a dooring zone. There is a bit of a painted buffer there. On the other side, I believe, or it could be another section, there's protected lanes. There's a little bit of everything going along in this corridor. So it is very inconsistent in terms of the different treatments. But yeah, I suppose I just wanted to focus on this actual intersection or this roundabout. Good pickup though.
Yeah, really good pickup. Just a question on analysis. Has there been a project evaluation on the protected roundabout here, Max, for all road users?
There has been, and in fact, we did the evaluation on this, so I can give you some info on it. So yeah, we did a, a study before this got implemented and then post-construction to show how things have changed for all road users. I'll go through some of those figures in the next couple of slides.
Great, thanks, Max.
No worries. So you had, I can see lots of comments going through there about the disadvantages for cyclists. And yes, I think at times the raised pavement, particularly where you're tying in with the drainage and things like that, they can sometimes create issues with debris, or just the different ramp grades can be uncomfortable for a cyclist. But the kind of the response that I was looking for there is cyclists do have to ride further to do their turning movements, in particular the right turn movement. If I was looking at a cyclist coming from the bottom using the protected facility, they do have priority at each of these legs, so they don't have to slow down for vehicles and give way, but they do have to travel further than if they were to just use the circulating area. Now, on an aerial, you think that that doesn't look so bad or seems negligible, and it kind of is negligible, but just, as a cyclist, I know that lots of the cycling community will always choose the route that is quickest and most convenient for them, which means that we do have cyclists that use the circulating area, like we're seeing this person here. Now, as I mentioned, we did do an evaluation on this, and we looked at how effective the protected roundabout has been for cyclists adopting that protected facility. So just to give you some stats, in terms of cyclists that wanted to travel through this roundabout, around 91% are using the protected feature. Okay, about 91% of cyclists use the protected roundabout. When it comes to turning right, because that adds a little bit more distance, that usage goes down to about 77%. So the cyclists turning right, about 77% will use the protected facility. The remaining 23% will be doing what this fellow here is doing and just using the circulating area. Now, depending on who you ask, some will say that that's a failure of the project. Others will say that that's just part of the project. That's okay. I tend to think that it's completely okay. As I mentioned, you've got a complete realm of different cyclists' skill levels and confidence. So to try and think that we can always get 100% of the time all cyclists using the safest option possible is just not necessarily a pragmatic way of looking at things. Instead, a better outcome would be, you know, are we seeing an uptake in cycling? Are we saying less traffic occurring here? Which is yes and yes. Both of those metrics were measured and both of those objectives were met. So more cyclists traveling through here, less vehicles traveling through here, and lower traffic speeds. And those were the real big KPIs for this project, is bringing down vehicle speeds, making it more attractive for cyclists, and increasing that participation. So if you were involved in a scenario where you really strongly believe that all cyclists should be using the protected facility, this is how it looks kind of on the approach for cyclists. You can see it's just a bit of a stencil and some line marking. Use bike lane at roundabout. And by no means does that, you know, deter a cyclist from actually just completely ignoring that and using the path that they want. If you were involved in a project where you thought, no, it's incredibly important that they don't interact with the circulating area at all, you could look to actually extend out these separators to kind of really corral cyclists into using that. So it's no longer an attractive option one way or the other. It's like it is actually inconvenient for you now to get to the circulating area. So if that was something that was deemed that you had to achieve on your project, that is something that you could look into. Now, I think I might pause here and give everyone a break, and we can come back in 4 minutes where I'll answer some questions. And yeah, 4 minutes. Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. Any questions from Catherine or Marissa?
Hello. Just a question on, is this something that can be legally enforced, cyclist movement within protected roundabout?
Right. So there is a road rule that states if there's a cycling facility present, a cyclist must use that or shall use that where reasonable to do so. And I think that kind of caveat clause of what is reasonable can be quite well argued. Once again, I wouldn't trust me for any legal advice. I have no legal background. I'm not a lawyer or a solicitor.
Me either. Yeah.
But you know, what happens if this protected facility was covered in debris or leaves or glass or vegetation was overgrown? Would it be reasonable for a cyclist to then enter the circulating carriageway? I would think so, but perhaps others would suggest not. Would it be reasonable if the cyclist chose the circulating area because they're a higher speed user as opposed to, you know, they're getting stuck behind slower cyclists in these types of spaces? Yeah. Perhaps. So yeah, there is a little bit of, you know, nuance there. And depending on how good your legal team is, it depends on, you know, what kind of outcome you'd get there.
Yeah, that's it. That's all from me. Thanks, Max.
Okay. Easy. In terms of the other legality, all of those give way and pedestrian crossing signs, they are regulatory signs. So they do, you know, require vehicles to yield. And if they did not, then they could be enforced. All right, so we're going to move away now from our protected roundabouts and talk about multi-lane roundabouts. And these are significantly risky areas for cyclists. This example that I've shown, I'll just move that banner up north. This example shown here is a rural environment. It is high speed. From memory, it's 80 kilometers per hour. And the east-west is a major highway. The north-south is a lesser kind of local road, collector road. And on this bottom leg, you can kind of see things start off quite well. We've got a separated bicycle facility. So cyclists are traveling off the carriageway, which is excellent. As they're approaching the roundabout, you can see, you might be able to see that the actual bicycle lane width kind of tapers. It gets narrower and narrower, which is a very uncomfortable thing to be doing. The reason for that is to account for swept paths of the through traffic lane. So only thinking of the general traffic and not thinking of the cyclist that could be there. But anyway, a cyclist that was in this lane, they've got a little green bicycle lane there, which has been installed adjacent the splitter island there. If a cyclist was traveling straight, they'd just access that area there and then continue. However, a cyclist turning right doesn't have many options. So if you wanted to turn right, you could potentially pause here. There's no curb ramps or anything like that, and then do quite an uncomfortable turn. Look to pick a gap in the traffic and then filter across to this section here. Once again, look to pick a gap in traffic and then continue your journey like that. It's not a realistic kind of journey. It's unlikely cyclists would do that. For those that don't feel comfortable, that's an option. But as I said, there's no actual curb ramps to facilitate that. So it's pretty unlikely that would be a common way cyclists use this. A slightly more common thing would be for a cyclist to turn right from this periphery position and do this. Now, I'm sure you can all see the issues with that, because a cyclist is having to turn right across 2 live traffic lanes, and a motorist may not be expecting that. Super, super uncomfortable, to be trying to do that as a cyclist. You'd want to be picking a point all the way back here before you get to the roundabout to check if there's any oncoming traffic. If you notice that there is a gap, you'd probably just be like, all right, I'm just going to do this right turn. And then you might do a quick head check before you get to that right turn point. But yeah, anyway, it's a very, very precarious situation to be in, to do a right turn movement there. Another way the right turn could be facilitated is just ignoring this facility altogether and try and get into the right turn lane. Just like general traffic. This one, I would say, is probably the most common, but then you don't have cyclists in a separated facility, and you've got cyclists in the circulating area mingling with other traffic. We've got heavy vehicles here, and it's just not a good recipe at all. So it's not a good design at all, what we're looking at. And to show you how things look out on the ground, you can kind of see what I was talking about there with that tapered in bicycle lane, just squeezing cyclists to that adjacent traffic lane is quite an uncomfortable thing to be doing. So you'd want to be keeping that consistent for starters. And yeah, you can really appreciate that just cycling around here would be quite a nervous thing to be doing, particularly if you're turning right and having oncoming vehicles that could be heading through. It's just a very precarious situation. Marissa.
Max, someone's just asked, is there a fence in the middle of the concrete island?
I don't believe so. So that island, just go back to this one. I think it's just the signage.
Okay.
Now, you might have noticed that there is this little traffic signal thing here, and for those with really good eyes, you might have seen that there's a hold line or stop bar there. Unfortunately, that's got nothing to do with cyclist facilities at all. That is just there because there is an adjacent rail line, and that's if the boom gates are down, those red left arrow goes on so motorists don't queue over the circulating area and, you know, block that facility, but nothing to do with cyclists, unfortunately. So these multi-lane roundabouts are significant safety concerns for cyclists, and they ought to be treated as such, as very, very high risk scenarios for cyclists, particularly, as I mentioned, if you've got cyclists turning right. Another example shows a very, very similar roundabout in terms of the configuration. However, the way that the cyclist connection has been treated is different. So I wanted to focus on this one. This one is in Canberra in the ACT. So just focusing on the right-hand side again, we've got a bicycle facility on road, and they get directed to an off-road facility. This off-road path moves cyclists away from the circulating area. There's a hold rail, which is those little U rails, where cyclists can prop and wait and give way to any vehicles, pick a gap before crossing over. And if they were to do a right turn, once again, there's a hold rail there and the curb ramps to help facilitate these types of movements. So 100%, this is much more circuitous, or it takes a lot longer for a cyclist to do this kind of movement. But in these scenarios, you've got high volumes of traffic, you've got high speeds, and so you just can't be trying to commingle cyclists within that space. It's not going to work. In an ideal world, we'd be able to grade separate everything and we wouldn't need to worry about conflict points at all. But, you know, we are pragmatic, and instead what we can do is assign the priority to general traffic, because if a motorist sees a give way for pedestrians and cyclists at roundabouts that look like this, they're not giving way. It's incredibly unlikely they'll give way. Also, because it's multi-lane, if this was a give way here to pedestrians and cyclists, you would have that masking issue once again of a vehicle there blocking the sight lines. Oh, that's a terrible sketch. I'll try that again. So say we had this as a priority crossing for pedestrians and cyclists, a vehicle that is on either the inside or the outside leg, just draw that one there, and a motorist that is approaching. This motorist may give way to a cyclist that's coming across, but the motorist behind could be completely oblivious that there's a crossing cyclist at all, because it's got that masking effect. So we generally don't do any pedestrian or cyclist priority crossings on multi-lane environments. It's not something that we really advocate for. I know there's examples of them, but we don't tend to do them. Here's how it looks on the ground in wonderful Canberra. And as you can see, cyclists are being corralled into that position there. It's not fenced off, so cyclists could still cross over here to get into the right lane and do that movement if that's what they wanted. But it does provide that for those that don't feel comfortable, that there is a crossing point that's provided. You will have to give way. You will have to wait until you've got a gap in traffic and then cross over. Now, as I said, it'd be wonderful to have all these things as just connected facilities for cyclists, but I am trying to be pragmatic in this space and acknowledge that where you are crossing motorways or high movement function corridors, you're pretty limited to be able to slow down vehicles in those spaces. Now, the other diagram I wanted to mention with multi-lane roundabouts is this one that was out of the Austroads guide previously. If you've got any printed versions of your Austroads documents, make sure that you put a big cross through this one because this has been superseded. We are no longer recommending to have our bicycle lanes actually demarcated within the circulating area on multi-lane roundabouts. So you can see this multi-lane roundabout has the bicycle lane right on that periphery. That's no longer being recommended, and that's taken out of guidance altogether. So if you've got any of those documents, make sure that you supersede those, and instead what we want to have is cyclists crossing at distinct points and acknowledging that the priority may not be awarded to them. Speaking of that movement function, I actually quite enjoy this as a concept design, which I do not know this area. This to me is just a bunch of lines on paper, but the way that I immediately interpret this is I can see that the east-west leg is multi-lane, so I'm going to assume it's a high movement function. For those that have done any movement in place type of training, this would be like the M1, where it's really, really important for, I realize other jurisdictions wouldn't call it M1, but anyway, this is just your really important getting goods and services through here, getting all those transport trucks and things like that. This would be your general traffic corridor. That's just my limited understanding of what I'm looking at here. Alternatively, the north-south legs, to me, they're undivided. Perhaps they're just a collector road, something that goes into a residential estate or something like that, and they may not serve that same movement function. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because that movement in place thinking can then tie into how we actually suggest our recommendations for cycling infrastructure. So if we look at cyclists that are crossing over the east-west or the motorway, we can see on the design note, it says install grab handles for cyclists at all crossing points. In other words, the priority is awarded to those general traffic. So if you were a cyclist, you'd be crossing here, you'd have to slow down, give way, pick a gap, cross over, slow down, give way, pick a gap, and then continue your journey. Conversely, on the lower order movement road, the north and south legs, we've got this note here of raised crossing with priority given to mammals, which is middle-aged men in lycra, as well as recreational cyclists and pedestrians crossing the minor road. So for these local roads, we've actually got more of an ability to affect the movement of traffic and the speeds. So we can actually raise that as a crossing point and award the priority to pedestrians and cyclists. So I like this as a concept to discuss that we can apply different treatments depending on what that road's function is and what's its primary purpose. So getting raised crossings on motorways is just incredibly unlikely. You'd be even more likely to try and grade separate those types of things. Whereas on our local roads, we've got a much stronger ability to be able to reduce traffic speeds and award priority to our vulnerable road users. I'll check in now before I get into the last little sub-module of today. And second, if I've got any questions.
Over here, Max.
No questions?
No.
No, all good. There's certainly examples I would not use.
Good.
those treatments. I'd be terrified in those environments. I guess just as a discussion, I don't know. I just feel like these types of scenarios are just kind of interim measures, aren't they? Because we just don't know what to do. It's high order roads, high speed, lots of traffic. Traffic has the priority, and it's like, oh yeah, we do have cyclists,
Yeah.
and yeah, we'll just kind of, pop them here, and yeah, I just blows me away when I do see things like that on the higher speed environments.
I think that's very relevant, and I should clarify that this is certainly tailored for our jurisdictions. And if I was showing this presentation to someone in the Netherlands, they would have a big laugh at this. They would be like, no, you should be grade separating. They're like,
Yes,
there would be no other answer. So,
yeah,
and perhaps, with the way that we are seeing an uptake in cycling, we could be moving in that direction as well. And I certainly would be very positive to that experience. But as I mentioned, this is just trying to live within the pragmatics of the real world. And
that's right.
Yeah,
cool. Just a couple of questions that popped through while we were just chatting there.
Right.
Presumably we should be looking to have signalized intersections rather than roundabouts for these multi-lane situations.
It's a good question. If it was purely from the cyclist perspective, a protected intersection would offer a significant benefit. You generally wouldn't install protected intersections on these higher order roads, though, so that might be some type of consideration. And it also may be challenging to be able to convert a existing roundabout into a signalized intersection, because then you may have more crashes occurring with general traffic, and if that's at a T-bone type of angle, that can result in quite serious or fatal outcomes. So there's lots to explore within that space. And one of the tools that we regularly use is a safe system assessment, which is like an actual way to quantify how different options align with safe system principles. So if you were looking at the safety of, I don't know, just say the signalized intersection versus a roundabout versus grade separation, there'd be scores for each of those design options, and can help with the project team to make a decision on what would actually be the best outcome.
Yeah, that's great. Good point, Max. From an RSA perspective, what are your thoughts around dual lane uncontrolled crossing points?
I think they're a high risk. I think, as I mentioned before, if you've ever got two lanes adjacent each other, you've got that masking risk. And so invariably you will have a moment in time where it could be possible that pedestrians or cyclists crossing are completely blocked by another vehicle. In saying that, does that mean that you just don't do any facilities and then, you're not encouraging any activity at all? I don't think that's a good outcome either, because if there's a demand there for pedestrian cycling activity, then presumably there's surrounding land use that is generating that attraction. Perhaps it's bigger than that, and it goes back to our strategic planning of where we are actually putting things that are important to our community. And if it's adjacent a multi-lane roundabout, that's probably not where I'd be prioritizing things like schools or shopping centers or things like that, because we don't want lots of pedestrians crossing in these scenarios.
Yeah, certainly. That's all, Max. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Keep the questions coming and I'll keep getting through the contents. Local roundabouts. It is our final time that we get to do this one, which is what's wrong with this photo. It's our last confused cyclist. I'll get her out of the way. What do you think is wrong with this photo? Pop it in the chats. I'll give you 27 seconds. And I'll also give a point, or a prize to anyone that knows the location of this roundabout. 22 seconds now. Remember to guess where the location is as well. Not in Melbourne. Not in Victoria. It's not in Adelaide.
Ah, saw Hobart pop up.
It's not in Hobart.
Bonnie Doon.
Oh, the beautiful Bonnie Doon. It's not in Bonnie Doon.
Who's going to Bonnie Doon? Brisbane.
Oh, Alan with Lonnie. It is in Launceston.
Oh, there you go.
Give a prize out to Alan there. It is Elfin Road, Brisbane Street, and Lawrence Street, and it's an example of a peanut roundabout. For those playing at home or interested, it's a peanut roundabout.
Peanut roundabout. Don't you just love those end cycle lanes, Max, where it just ends and just points you towards a lovely curb?
That's it. So let's give a prize out to the 6th person that said ending the cycle lane was what's wrong with this photo. Because unfortunately, as Catherine says, that is a really common thing to happen. And, you know, you've got some degree of cycling facility and then you've got nothing. And cyclists may be like, well, I have to push out in front of live traffic, which is an uncomfortable thing to be doing. Or you get off your bike and mount that curb and channel and use the footpath, which is also not an ideal scenario. So pretty common thing to be occurring within our local roundabouts, but not one would be recommending. Instead, we want to try and keep that consistent, you know, treatment all the way through. So cyclists feel confident that they are able to continue through that roundabout and they don't have to dismount or things like that. Now, the way that that is most commonly achieved is through the use of sharrows. So we already spoke about this within our mid-block section. For local streets, that we would be recommending sharrows where speeds are 40 kilometers per hour or less. Similarly, for roundabouts, we would only recommend these in local scenarios where you've got lower speeds and lower traffic volumes. You wouldn't be doing this in our multi-lane environments, and you wouldn't be doing this on higher order roads because it's just not an appropriate use of them. But what they're doing here, as you can see in this example, the bicycle lane is similarly ending, and there is this sharrow there that is centered right in the middle of the traffic lane. So gives cyclists a bit of confidence that they are able to shift across, and rather than ride adjacent the curb and channel, they can ride in the middle of the traffic lane. Similarly gives motorists an indication that, you know, cyclists are expected to be riding in the traffic lane. So we've already gone through the exact definition of the sharrows and things like that. The way that I actually recommend them and like to see them installed is giving motorists kind of prior knowledge that this conflict is going to occur, and using supporting treatments like local area traffic management treatments or traffic calming, so that we're actually slowing the vehicles down. So in this example, we've got an asphalt speed cushion that's been implemented. So vehicles will be slowing down for that. In a perfect world, what you'd love to see is this treatment occurring before that merge point occurs. So you'd have vehicles that are slowed down prior to where that conflict point exists with cyclists. The other thing that is also encouraged if you're doing our sharrows within roundabouts is the use of the sharrow markings within the circulating area. You can't see them in this photo because there are none. But yeah, it's once again another reminder that cyclists don't have to ride in the periphery of the roundabout. Instead, you want them to be taking a more central, focused location, which is right in the middle of the area. So providing the sharrows in the circulating area in the middle of the traffic lane is also another important thing to consider. Just another example of this being used. It's fairly common way to be able to address cycling safety at roundabouts is just to use sharrows and slow down general traffic through the use of speed humps and things like that. The remainder of today's session, I'm going to go through some just few education campaigns. So moving a little bit away from our cycling infrastructure. And then I'm going to go through the final assignment that you are required to complete to obtain your certificate. So you're welcome to continue asking any questions, but just wanted to give you a little heads up of what we've still got to go. So while I'm going through these little education campaigns, I'll get Marissa to launch the final poll, and I'll just chat through these examples. So in California, they do this annual bike month, which is every June, and they do lots of, flyers and media and videos and posters at bus shelters and things like that, just reminding all users of how vulnerable cyclists are. And I think that's important to be able to convey that, because it is an annual thing, it would help to keep that issue at front of mind for general traffic and things like that. The reason I'm talking about these campaigns is because not every issue can be solved by engineering. Not every issue can be resolved by, putting in XYZ treatments. We do require working with our communities so that they understand, what is a sharrow? How am I meant to react and things like that. So just wanted to share some examples. Few years ago, you may have seen this kind of trending on Twitter, was this idea of the Red Cup project. Basically, communities around the world put these little red cups on the edge of their bicycle lane, and then they'd take a photo later on in the day to show how well those red cups fared, and invariably it was, crushed quite quickly. That was a real community-led campaign, and it did go quite viral. There was lots of examples out of the States and Canada, Australia, Asia, Europe. Yeah, kind of just went all around the world with this idea of, look how quickly vehicles are encroaching into the bicycle lane and how vulnerable we are. And basically just applying line marking is not enough to protect us. Lots of these examples also included things like using tomatoes and things just to add to that drama. But yeah, quite a useful little thing to know of. This one's one of my favorites, where a individual in New York kept writing to their local governments and really wanted to get protected bicycle lanes on this particular section of road because that's where they ride to work every day, and kept getting the no, we can't do it. So this gentleman decided to go to the hardware store and purchase about 100 plungers and just glued them down onto the pavement and made their own little protected bicycle lane, which is pretty, got to give them that, pretty innovative. Unfortunately, that did not last, and the council did rip them up. And to my knowledge, it is still an unprotected facility, which is a disappointing outcome. But gotta be impressed by that vigilanteism and just getting on with it and doing it yourself. The final little campaign is one out of Scotland. This one was run probably about 10 years ago or something like that now, which is this idea of see cyclist, think horse. Yeah, I would recommend you watch this one after your session today. And it did get pulled from the airwaves, well, for two reasons. One being that this cyclist in the video is not wearing a helmet. That is not a legal requirement within the UK, but it was deemed as not showing a good message. The other reason people got quite upset about this video was that this cyclist was not riding close enough to that curb. And as you can see, that's like a bluestone paver. So I can understand why they're trying to get away from that. But people got quite filthy at this ad and it did get pulled. But anyway, just another interesting one. So you can watch that after this session as well. Now, I will get stuck into our assignment now. And there's a few details that I need to go through. So that's why I wanted to spend some time here, just to make sure that everyone's crystal clear of what's required and how to get your certificate. So please bear with me. I will just go through this kind of dot point by dot point. So as mentioned, we do have a final 360-degree video for you to watch. This one's a slightly longer video because there's I suppose a little surprise there at the end, which just shows another example and some history and things like that. So encourage you to watch all the way to the end and yeah, get stuck into that as part of completing this course. There's two documents that you'll need to download. One is Letter to LGA's template. So you can download a copy of that Word document. The other one is if you click on the module 4 assignments, and there's a Word document there as well. I've already got those documents open, so I'm just going to open the module 4 assignment Word document first and run you through what is required. So the first thing is we're going to get you to actually pick a site. And what I mean by that is pick a location where there's some type of bicycle infrastructure. It could be a shared path, it could be a protected bicycle lane, it could be an on-road facility, it could be cyclists at an intersection. Whatever it is, some degree of cycling facility. Step 2 is review bike spots. So we've made a few comments of that this week, and I thought I'd just show you what bike spot is. So this did just launch this week, and it's been incredibly popular already. I think I saw they've already had about 6,000 people responding with where they feel safe or unsafe on the network. Hopefully this loads. Basically an interactive map where anyone that chooses to access this has the opportunity to share their own perspective of how they feel riding in these environments and marking down spots where they have noted they've had issues or where they feel like this is what we need more of. And it doesn't seem to be working for me, which is annoying. Anywho, it's, as I said, it's a map where you can glean community feedback. Now, you could actually switch those two steps around. If you instead wanted to use Bike Spot first, maybe zoom into a location that's close to you or close to where you work or where you go pick up the kids from school, and see if there's any of those little markers, because then you can use that existing community concern to help feed into your assignment. So you can do it either approach. You don't need to have that data. It's just, it can be used to help you. Step number 3, we actually want you to visit the site. We're not making it a requirement that you cycle through the sites. Not everyone has bikes and not everyone would feel comfortable riding there. But we do want you to go out there and actually visually inspect the site. The reason being, Google Street View is only as good as However, recently that was shot, and sometimes that can be many, many years out of date. So we do recommend that you visit the site and take some photos from the site, preferably a selfie, just so we can see that you went there, and use that as part of your assignment. Step number 4 is, once again, answering the questions that we've got listed below. The little flourish that we've added here is we're actually encouraging everyone here to respond to the questions in any form that suits you. I would say, based on experience, a lot of the ones that we get are in Word documents or PowerPoint or, PDF, and that's completely fine. We've also had people just get really, really creative, and some people have done like comic book sketches. We've had TikToks being sent to us. We've had like families getting involved, so you can see video footage of how it feels as a small child to ride across a particular cycling treatment and things like that. Some people just really relish the opportunity to express their creativity, so this is just a platform for that. You don't get marked on your creativity, so don't be stressed by it. You can use any form that suits you. So just some ideas there. Yeah, video, a podcast, PowerPoint, hand-drawn sketches, posters, brochures. We've had a lot. We've had a poem. We had a rap, like a song that was made. It's also just entertaining for us as markers, because I'm sure, as you could appreciate, if you're going through hundreds of these assignments, it's nice to have a little bit of diversity. But you do whatever suits you, and we'll be only marking on the way that you have responded to the questions. So the questions that you are required to answer is, what infrastructure currently exists? And once again, what you'll be marked on is your jargon or the terminology that you are using. It needs to be consistent with what we have been teaching in these courses, and just to demonstrate that you have an understanding of what the industry would use to refer to these things. What are the hazards for cyclists? So you can be quite broad and talk about a whole raft of things, or you can be very, very specific and be concerned about a specific risk. That's up to you. We do also look at which site you've picked at, which site you have picked. So if you are, picking a roundabout and the only thing that you noted as a risk was that there's a little bit of leaves in the gutter and that could be an issue for cyclists, well, we might be like, there's probably some other risks that you should be noting there. So keep that in mind. We want to see the most relevant risks to cyclists, things that present the highest risk for them. The final question is, what could be installed to better improve safety for cyclists? So this is where we've basically given you a blank check, and we've said, go on and please design something or suggest a design that would improve safety for cyclists. Now, I did say a blank check, but we do also want to be providing some degree of pragmatic solutions. So if your solution is, if you're looking at a bicycle path that's on a motorway and it just closed down the motorway and then you don't have any conflict points, theoretically, yes, you are correct. But we do want to make sure that we are getting solutions that could be feasibly constructed. So keep that in mind. So those are the things that you will be marked on, is how well you are articulating the hazards, if you're using the correct terminology, and are the safety measures that you've identified actually going to improve things for cyclists, and how likely is that going to happen? Once you've done all that, in whichever format that you've got, save and upload the document, this document, sorry, as well as any of the responses to the LMS. actually, we don't need this document saved anymore. I apologize. You can just save whatever file you need and upload that to the LMS. There is this optional step as well, which is basically rather than just let this little research assignment sit here within this space, if you want to offer it to others that could potentially act on it, by all means, we encourage that. So we've actually drafted a letter that you could submit to your local member or your local road authority, local government authority or state authority or whatever it is. You could fill this in and then send them off to them. So you'd need to obviously look up who maintains this road or looks after it. And what it says is, I've recently completed the cycling infrastructure technical training course provided by Safe System Solutions and the Amy Gillett Foundation. As part of this course, I inspected a section of your cycling network. You'll need to fill in the pink. The site I assessed was at whatever location. I wish to alert council to the following design features that increase the risk of cyclist crashes at this location. And you can just dot point those. I recommend councils look at the following treatments to improve safety for cyclists. You can delete this paragraph below if it's not applicable, but you could also include a link to the BikeSpot survey with any of the community feedback. If there's been no feedback, just delete that altogether and sign off on it. If you are going with that approach and you do want to send this off, we've just asked you to please CC in the training team, just so we've got a record of who's going out there and things like that. We have had a few participants in the past that have adopted for this, but by all means, you are not marked on that. It's an optional activity. So your choice for that one there. That is the assignment. I'll double check that I didn't miss anything there with Marissa and Catherine. And there's just one more thing I wanted to show on the LMS.
No, that's all good over here.
That's good. My BikeSpot timed out.
I've just got a question. Would you consider a cycling route which is nominated by council as one but has no dedicated facilities a suitable option?
I think if there's nothing there, I wouldn't be doing that, because the first question that you'll get marked on is what are the existing facilities? And if you said none, yeah, I'd rather see something that has been implemented already, just so we can make sure that you're using the correct phrase there. Last thing I wanted to show, and then I'll answer any more questions, is within the LMS, under resources, under reference documents and resources, we have provided this PDF, which is cycling 360 footage examples. And if you click on that one there and open it up, it's a PDF, which I guess you could refer to it as like a library of different cycling infrastructure. So in case down the track you need to remember what is a bidirectional facility or what is a one-way protected bicycle lane, you can click on these and it'll take you to a YouTube video of a 360-degree footage of actually cycling through there. And we just want to make this available for all our participants. So as you do go on to, you know, design and deliver improved cycling infrastructure, you've got this as a bit of a resource there. We also included this little bit of a legend here to say things that we do like and don't like using emojis. The please no ones, these ones here, I think they're just worth a watch anyway, because you can see why these are so precarious, like multi-lane roundabouts and stuff like that. So by all means, download that, save a local copy, and you can use that for the future. Once all your coursework has been completed and everything's been graded, you go right down to the bottom of your LMS. There's a short feedback form just so you're able to give your experiences on the course. We really want to make this as engaging and, content appropriate as possible. So we strongly encourage you to, put down your honest feedback there. You do actually need to complete it in order to get your certificate. So it will be a grayed out section of Safe Cycling Infrastructure Certificate until all the coursework is done and that feedback form is done as well. And the final thing that I'll say is if you wanted to share your certificate through social media or LinkedIn or whatever it is, you can share your achievement online. We have created just some words that you can copy and paste into your post, as well as some little like banners or badges that you can upload as well, just to indicate the competencies that you have achieved by going through this course. So I do hope that I've covered everything. As I said, there was a lot of detail there, so appreciate if any of that was missed. Just send an email to the training team or myself, and we'll look after it. We've loved having all this participation, and it's great to see so many people asking all these questions. It's genuinely been the highest level of questions I've had in a cohort, which is really positive. It's kept me on my toes. Yeah. Are there any final questions from the group or anything that I've missed?
Yeah, we've just had a question come in. How long do we have to complete the assignment? So the assignment for today is due on Friday, the 3rd of November. So that particular one is due the 3rd of November. And like Max did mention, all of the quizzes and tasks or assignments from this course do need to be completed in order to gain your certificate. So if so we've got some due dates there, but everything will need to be done in order for you to get that certificate.
Thank you, Marissa.
No other questions? No.
All good. Yeah, no more questions from my end either.
Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for both our moderators, Catherine and Marissa, for keeping everything going at the back end and getting all this content, running smoothly. I really appreciate your help. Really appreciate everyone joining today, and excited to see you take on this new knowledge into your own projects and get SafeLink Cycling embedded into our network. So hope you all have a lovely weekend, and thank you very much for being part of the course.
Thanks, everyone. It's been really fun.
It has been fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, Max, as well.
Thank you, Max. Yeah,
Thanks,
fantastic
everyone.
job.
Yeah, bye.
See you, everyone.